Yes, by Kalish and Gideon Sterer. Illustrated by Romona, Kaulitzki. Hopefully I didn't butcher that name. And it says, Merry Christmas to Apollo from Cease and Eileen, your aunts and uncles. This is a map of the little owl's home, Rockefeller Center, which is New York City, and Ravensbeard Wildlife Center, which is in another area of New York. So, do you think this is based off a true story?
Maybe.
It says so, based on the true story of the little owl named Rockefeller. Yeah.
Rocky for short.
Rocky for short. That's a good one. Once in a little town.
It says that.
It does later. Oh, good foreshadowing for us. Once in a little town in the little front yard lived a little owl high in the branches of a very big tree. For the curious little owl, not even a year old, the world was filled with wonder. Streams were for splashing, forests were for flying, and friends of all feather were merrily made. One day, when winter had arrived, the town around her began to transform. Houses were decorated, lights were strung, jingles and music filled the icy air. Little Owl watched and listened, and that night, when darkness came, the whole town glittered and glowed. "What is going on here?" she asked her friends. "Christmas," said Moose. "And what is that?" Little Owl said. "Not sure," said Rabbit. "No idea," said Skunk. "No one knows," said Squirrel. "But it happens every year." The next morning, confused as ever, Little Owl flew home, where she found some people standing around the big tree's trunk. "It's beautiful," said one of them. "It'll be a perfect Christmas tree," said another. "A Christmas tree?" Little Owl wondered. "My home is Christmas?" The workers began attaching wires and ropes to the tree. As Little Owl hid in the shadows, the branches pulled tight around her. She was trapped! Trapped! Then she heard a roar. The tree shook, spinning and swaying. It was lowered down onto a truck. Little Owl was dizzy. "Is this Christmas?" "Say goodbye to our tree," someone called as the big truck rumbled away. "Your tree?" wondered Little Owl. "How could anyone own a tree?" For hours and hours they drove. The cold wind rushed beneath her feathers. Little Owl was hungry, but there was nothing to eat. She was thirsty, but there was nothing to drink. She was lonely, and her friends were far, far away. "Is this Christmas?" Pinned against the tree, she tried to sleep. At last, 3 days later, the truck came to a stop. Again the tree jostled and lifted. Then all at once its branches spread. Worn and weak, Little Owl edged out into the light. "Where am I?" Below her, hundreds of people stomped and scowled, and cars clogged the streets. Above, strange towers scraped the sky. This is not home. She tried to flap her wings, but she wasn't strong enough. As her eyes were closing, she saw "There's an owl in here." The worker took her home and drove her off and gave her to somebody in another car. Ravensbeard Wildlife Center. When Little Owl awoke, she was in a box. It opened, and a new face peered inside. "Hello, little one. I'm Ellen. Let's get you inside." Whatever Christmas was, it seemed to have gotten inside the house. The place was warm and cozy, and it seemed oddly to be made for birds. "Why are you here?" Little Owl asked. "Broken leg?" said Hawk. "Broken wing," said Falcon. "But Ellen looks after us until we're ready to fly free again." After all this, Little Owl wondered, could a human really help after all this?
See, it says Walkie.
Ah, yeah, they gave him the name right there, Rocky.
It's short.
Yeah.
That's how I know it's Walkie.
Ah. Over the next few days, Little Owl gulped down water and gobbled thawed mice. She was given an X-ray, and every day Ellen checked her feathers, eyes, and her ears. Ellen is helping. Could Christmas be caring? Could Christmas be kind? Ellen held Little Owl in her hand. "After all you've been through," she said, "it's a miracle you're alive." But was Little Owl ready to fly? "Almost," cried her new friends. Ellen smiled. "Almost," she said. At last, at dusk, on Christmas, they drove to the top of the mountain. Ellen lifted Little Owl from the box and raised her arm. "You're free," she said. "Welcome home." For the last time the friends looked at each other. Then Little Owl flapped her wings and flew higher and higher into the sky. But she wasn't going home just yet. When at last she reached the very big tree, which was now a very big Christmas tree, she settled on her favorite branch. Bright and brilliant, the city was not what she remembered. The cars had disappeared. The great towers were merrily lit. The people were smiling and skating. Some were even singing. They held hands and hugged. All, it seemed, were eager to love. Is this Christmas? Yes, Little Owl thought, it must be. La-loo, 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 la-loo. Okay. For some time, Little Owl sat basking in the golden glow. When at last the moon peeked above the buildings, she knew it was time to go home. And she flew, and she flew. There's her friends again, Skunk and Moose, Rabbit.
And Rabbit and Squirrel.
"You're back!" her friends cried, gathering round. "And just in time for Christmas," squealed Moose. "Whatever that is," added Rabbit. "Actually, I may have learned something about it," said Little Owl, as they all nuzzled close. "Could you tell us?" "Of course," said Little Owl, knowing full well that this was Christmas, nestling close with her friends. And that's it.
Wait, you have to read another story.
This is the note from the author, from Ellen Kalish. "I have loved animals all of my life. When I was born, my family and I shared a one-bedroom apartment with a squirrel monkey. We later took care of finches and canaries, hamsters, snakes, lizards, a skunk, horses and chickens, a toucan, a caiman, and a woolly monkey named Charlie Brown."
What's a caiman?
I think it's a type of... It's either a type of bird or monkey. I don't know. We'll have to look that up. Charlie Brown. "Not to mention cats and dogs. And I knew how to care for each one. Years later, I read an article about volunteering as a wildlife rehabilitator, and I knew immediately that was what I wanted to do. I began an apprenticeship, and 2 years later I started Ravensbeard Wildlife Center. Originally, it was a place for all animals that needed help, but the resources needed for specialized diets and housing were too much, so I stuck to my first love, birds, and Ravensbeard became a center for hummingbirds, songbirds, waterfowl, wading birds, and birds of prey. I continue to learn from each bird I rescue. Wildlife rehabilitators like me are trained in rescue and recovery, meaning they are the only people who can legally house wildlife for a temporary period of time. If you see an injured or orphaned animal, please call your local veterinarian, feed store, or state's Department of Environmental Conservatism. Please do not attempt to rehabilitate an animal on your own. The very first time I released a bird and watched it fly was beyond thrilling. I have been fortunate enough to work with birds for more than 20 years, a job that nourishes my heart and soul. If you are passionate about wildlife, the environment, or animals in general, I encourage you to volunteer at a rehabilitation center, a shelter, a veterinarian's office, or anywhere animals need help. You can make the world a better place. And this one here is called The Real Story of Rockefeller. On a quiet day in November 2020, I received a phone call from a woman asking if Ravensbeard takes owls for rehabilitation. I told her we did, and there was a moment of silence before she said, "Okay, I'll call back when my husband comes home from work. He's got the baby owl tucked into a box for the long ride." I asked where her husband had found the owl, and she said, "In the Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center." A few hours later, a little face was looking up at me. It was a saw-whet owl, the smallest kind in the northeastern United States, which is why people often think they must be babies. I brought the little owl back to Ravensbeard, where my staff and I gave it fluids, warmth, and all the tender mice it could eat. After visits to the vet and to an owl specialist, we discovered the owl, whom we had named Rockefeller, or Rocky for short, was a girl and a first-year hatch set to migrate south for the winter. By the time Rocky had become a media sensation, and we were receiving hundreds of texts, emails, and calls about her condition, we protected her from attention during her 8 days at Ravensbeard, which she spent gaining weight and strength. Then at dusk on cool winter's eve, when the alarm birds, crows, blue jays, etc., were asleep, we brought Rocky to a quiet spot in the nearby conifer forest. We wanted her to have all night to start her migration, and by dawn we knew she would find a safe place to sleep away the day. She would repeat this pattern until she found her way to a warm and food-rich environment. As I released my grip on Rocky, she paused and looked directly into my eyes. Then once she readied herself, she flew perfectly to a nearby white pine. She jumped to a higher branch, and in a blink, she was gone. With a sigh of relief, I watched the tiny wood nymph disappear, a memory I will never forget. And that is the true story of Rockefeller. What do you think of that, Apollo? And they turned the story into a story about Christmas and what Christmas means, huh? Mm-hmm. But the true story is she was just an owl trapped in a tree.
Christmas tree.
Yeah, trapped in a famous Christmas tree, one that's in one of the largest parks in any big city, city.
In the world.
Well, not in the world, but in one of the largest
California.
cities in the United States. Well, this is New York, on the other side of the United States. Yeah.
On the other side of the world?
The other side of the United States, about 3,000 miles from us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we say, adios!
Okay, adios!